More thoughts on Pacers preseason game one. Is Jordan Nwora really going to be in the Pacers rotation? Is Aaron Nesmith getting underrated in discussions about his long-term future with the team? And Pacers Rockets tonight, what to watch for in preseason game two. We'll get to all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today the setup is done. The podcast studio and the new house is finished, so thank God for that if you're watching on YouTube. And we're talking more about the Pacers preseason action stuff from Monday, Sunday, that either surprised me, didn't get talked about enough, or should be talked about more. And looking at preseason action tonight, Pacers Rockets in Houston for game two, a different, unique test for the Pacers tonight against the new look Houston team. Tomorrow night, we'll be breaking down that game with a guest. I would like to have a post-game guest on a couple more times this season. I did not do that very often last year. We'll see who it is. I have a good hunch, but we'll see. Let's start by talking about the thing in Pacers preseason game one that I didn't talk about a lot for various reasons. The main one being that Jarace Walker was incredible anyway in his minutes that he did play, but it was Jordan Nwora being in the Pacers rotation in at least the part of the game that seemed like the more normally structured rotation part for both Memphis and Indiana, right? 4:38 to go in the first quarter. Jordan Nwora comes in, and he came in with Aaron Nesmith and Isaiah Jackson, and that was part of the bench group. TJ McConnell was in at that time. Bruce Brown had been subbed out. So I think it was McConnell, Mathurin, Nesmith, Nwora, Jackson. Sounds a lot like what the second unit has been discussed as, except no Andrew Nembhard because he's, of course, out with the kidney stones. So that was the most surprising thing to me. I did say every year it seems like there's one somewhat surprising sub or reserve or whatever for the Pacers. And that is a consequence of them having a deep young team in recent seasons. And it's not like they've been without justification, like Terry Taylor last year, for example, O'Shea Brissett the year before not being in it for Torrey Craig. You could go on and on back in time. TJ McConnell and Aaron Holiday debates from years in the past. So Jordan Nwora was the guy that immediately I went, oh, Jordan Nwora is in. It's the first quarter. Jarace Walker has not played yet. Jarace Walker did not play in the first half. Is Jordan Nwora really going to sneak in to the Pacers rotation? And Jordan Nwora helped himself in the case of like, hey, don't forget about me when you're thinking about this team's rotation. I'm guilty of glossing over him and talking about the Pacers top 10 plus 11th being TJ McConnell, and that being that he would be guy 12. And there are a lot of ways he could play, but there are also a lot of ways that Ben Shepherd could be a deep replacement instead of Nwora. So I've glossed over him maybe too much. And he hit two of his first four shots. And so his first impression was good. And his first half stat line for Jordan Nwora. So this is with the rest of, here are the guys that played in the first half of the Pacers. There's a 9-man rotation, right? Mathurin, Toppin, Turner, Brown, McConnell, Hield, Nwora, Jackson, Nesmith. Add in a Halliburton. That's kind of what you're going to see, right? That's what it seems like you're going to see roughly. So Nwora was the surprising player. In that first half, Jordan Nwora was 3 for 6 from the field, 2 rebounds, and 7 points, right? His final stat line was clunky, and a lot of his crummier plays came in the third quarter and the second half. In the first half, when he was playing with the Pacers rotation guys, he actually looked solid, but he was in there instead of Walker, and that really surprised me. Really surprised me. Is this actually going to be a thing that the Pacers decide to do? Well, let's start by taking a little trip back in time. If you remember, I talked about this a few weeks ago. This is why I do the news updates in the offseason. September 23rd is when the interview came out. The NBA.com coach interviews. They did one with Rick Carlisle. Steve Oshburner did the interview with Rick Carlisle. And he asked Rick, are you counting on Obi Toppin being driven to prove doubters wrong? Here's Rick Carlisle's answer about Obi Toppin. He said, look, since TJ Warren's injury 3 years ago, the Pacers have been in search of a four-man, a starting four, and a legitimate backup. So with Toppin, with the drafting of Walker, and with Aaron Nesmith back this year, we've got 3 guys that have played that position effectively. Not to mention Jordan Nwora, who played very well at the end of the year. So all of a sudden, we've got a lot of possibilities there. So the 2 things that stood out to me, 1, including Nesmith in the forward section. We'll talk about Nesmith in the second segment. And 2, getting Jordan Nwora in there at all, right? Clearly an emphasis on like, hey, we have Jordan Nwora. He's good. Jordan Nwora lost weight this summer to get down to like 215, be a little more mobile, work his way around, wiggle on the perimeter, right? There are ways that you can squint and say, yes, he makes sense as a player who can do stuff for the Pacers. Now, here's the key argument here. He's good. At least for the Pacers, he's been good, mostly offensively, right? His defense is definitely a work in progress. I think he would even tell you that. That is definitely his weakest side of the floor, especially for the Pacers. Like his defensive impact numbers with the Bucks last year were okay. With the Pacers, they were the worst of his career. But he's on 40% three-point shooter, at least since mostly a 40% three-point shooter, one rough stretch with Milwaukee. Good finishing, good enough finishing at the rim. The reason his percentages with the Pacers have been so high is he's just been lights out from mid-range since being traded to the Pacers, right? His shooting percentages, right, for at the rim, 60% with the Pacers last year. That's below his league average. 46.5% from 3 to 10 feet, slightly above his league average. His three-point percentage slightly above his league average, but his 10 to 16 footers, 50%, 16% above his league average. That's where a lot of his number jumps came from, but he just looked more comfortable. He played a lot more, right? He was good for the Pacers. So that is obviously an important factor in discussing all this is, yeah, he was good. It's not like he did anything to not play. And I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was that Jordan Nwora didn't play because at the very end of I think it was the last practice. I can't remember, and I apologize. This is bad reporting or talking, but one of the practices we could see near the end of last week, there was a group working with Lloyd Pierce late while we were doing media, and that group working with Lloyd Pierce was Isaiah Wong, Ben Shepherd, Jarace Walker, Kendall Brown, and Oscar Tshiebwe. And Jalen Smith was kind of helping too. It was kind of some 3-on-3 stuff, but like a young group. And hey, that 5 happened to be the 5 that they were kind of using at the end of the game with Jalen Smith in there, against the Grizzlies. So maybe I should have seen it coming because that group did happen. I think that was the 7th. Now that I'm looking back through my notes, that would have been Saturday's practice, the last one before they left. So there was evidence that he might be with that group, but that doesn't mean one practice does not mean anything, right? They've been mixing and matching groups. That's a very young group. Perhaps that was done strategically just for learning purposes. I thought Jarace Walker would certainly be in the rotation, right? But we've also seen Walker in some not deep reserve groups, in some bench groups. He talked about, remember, playing with Tice and who was the rest of his group? Andrew Nembhard, and I forget the other one, right? We've heard it before with Jarace where he's in a different group. So Nwora's good, right? I don't want to lose that. He's a great shooter, great on the mid-rangers, even though there's the weak defense. The trouble is the long-term versus short-term approach of if you're just talking about Jarace Walker versus Jordan Nwora in the rotation, Jarace Walker is the long-term play and maybe the short-term play. He was better Sunday night, certainly. I mean, he was incredible. He led the team in points and rebounds, right? Jarace Walker was awesome. So he is the better answer, short and long-term. And the Pacers are thinking long-term anyway. So Walker seems like the choice to me. Jordan Nwora, even if he was, maybe they were thinking long-term there. They can't extend him because of the contract he signed with the Bucks. And he's a free agent after the season. It's harder to know what his future is with your franchise, even if you like him. It's hard to know that. It's hard to guarantee anything in that way. So there's some push and pull there. So if I'm making decisions, Jarace Walker would be playing. He'd be my backup 4. Maybe that will happen in Houston. Maybe this is an overblown thing. And to nothing Jordan Nwora did wrong. He played well for the Pacers last year, right? Definitely. Career moments for him. Set the franchise record for points in a quarter. He could not have known when he was doing that Jarace Walker was the Pacers weren't going to win the lottery. So Jarace Walker was going to be the best player on their board available when they were up on the Pacers board. They can't have known that Obi Toppin was going to be available for nothing, basically, 2 crummy seconds. And so they have suddenly a bunch of power forwards, and Nesmith can squeeze in that spot as well. So he can't have known that, right? That sucks for him. It's bad circumstance, but it's just the reality of the Pacers that he's probably not a guy that I think at least should be one of their top 2 fours, even though he's done nothing wrong. He's played very well for the Pacers, especially offensively. But that doesn't mean this conversation has to just look like that, right? This conversation can be, should Jordan Nwora play instead of Jarace Walker as the backup 4? I don't think the answer should be yes to that question, but that is what happened in the first preseason games. This is a conversation worth having, and I'm looking forward to talking more in media sessions with Rick Carlisle to hear some thinking there. And Jarace could be the backup 4 tonight, and then you'll forget I even said this. But the other part of this is something that Caitlin and I talked about that I would like to continue to get into the ether just in case it becomes a thing, just in case. What if Jordan Nwora is the backup 4 and Jarace Walker is the backup 5. Then all of a sudden, there's some clarity about getting, short and long-term fits in there. Now, you are suddenly burying 3 centers, 2 of whom are young and who you've been developing if you're the Pacers, 2 of whom you've invested resources into, whether that's trading away Torrey Craig and giving a contract to him or trading up draft capital to draft him and Isaiah Jackson, right? Maybe you don't want to bury those guys, but if that's the best way to get your 10-man rotation, that is possible, right? Jordan Nwora versus Jarace Walker, not I'm playing Jarace Walker every time. If you're telling me it's Jordan Nwora versus some of the backup 5s, and if the backup 5s don't impress, I think you could make that a discussion worth having. So it's one game, and it's all that data we have. So maybe I'm making this more of a thing than it was. But that was the most surprising rotation thing to me. I wanted to talk more about it. And even though Wara's done nothing wrong, and he played well with the rotation players themselves, I think Walker should be the guy getting those minutes because the Pacers have said they're thinking long term. Yes, they have short-term goals. They want to win this year. That's great. I think you can do both with Jarace Walker, as you saw on Sunday. We'll see where that goes. That will be among the questions tracked tonight, right? You heard me in the first segment on Sunday go through the starters, the rotation questions, the new guys, all that sort of stuff. We're going to do that every preseason game, and that will happen once again tonight. And the Jordan Nwora, Jarace Walker discussion will certainly get brought up again. Let's talk about a different reserve forward, and that's Aaron Nesmith, who quietly had a pretty good game and led the Pacers in free throw attempts, really, against the Grizzlies. What does that mean? Does that mean anything? Is he getting underrated in discussions about the Pacers right now and their long-term future? We'll talk about that here in the second segment. Before we do that, though, I need to talk to you guys about the great people over at Jase Medical who are making the Jase case, which provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for easy emergency use. Everybody should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind so that you are not just hoping you have access to medication in an emergency. You've got it. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication on hand. It's simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation care so you do not get caught unprepared. They ship it right to you. It's super easy. Get $20 off their life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical by using our code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JESE medical.com to try the Jase case. Do not get caught unprepared. Try Jase case today. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, the French kid. He played Victor Wembanyama preseason debut against Chet Holmgren. There were some crazy plays. J-Dub crossed over Wemby, and it looked like a sick crossover. I was already kind of oohing and on as a viewer. And then Wemby just kind of turned around with these little shuffle steps and reached his arm over and just kind of like leaned towards the play, blocked the shot, right? He got cooked on a dribble, turned around and blocked the shot. I mean, he just does some stuff that's impossible. It's crazy. Chat was also amazing. I had a lot of interest in him as well. So Locked On Thunder could be your second listen too. I'm excited to watch those 2 guys this year. That was a super fun game. You can get more on that game from either Locked On Thunder or Locked On Spurs. Here at Locked On Pacers, let's talk about Aaron Nesmith. Not as tall as the 2 guys I just mentioned, but perhaps an overlooked piece of the Pacers. I was looking through the box score today, thinking of things I wanted to dive into a little bit more from a Pacers perspective, just peeking through some stats, right? I thought about talking about 53 three-point attempts. 19 of them from the rookies. That's crazy. I also thought about talking about them winning the possession battle against Memphis. They won the rebounding battle, something that is kind of important to the Pacers. 16 offensive rebounds for the Pacers. Those are topics for another day. Today, we're talking about Aaron Nesmith because what caught my eye was looking through the Pacers' free throw attempts. They had 24, and Aaron Nesmith had a quarter of them. He took 6 of them himself. Let's talk about what they were. One of them, actually 2 of them, one of the trips to the line came in transition. He flew ahead after a stop. He contested a Luke Kennard 3. He leaked out. Ben Mathurin got the rebound. Credit to Ben Mathurin. Ben Mathurin threw a beautiful full-court pass. Nesmith catches, draws a foul, gets the line. Great leak out. Textbook. He did the contest perfectly to force the Luke Kennard miss. Second one, nose for the ball play. In the paint. Offensive rebound right to him. Going through 2 guys. Draws an off-ball foul. They were in the bonus. Right, fighting for a rebound between 2 guys. And the third one just takes the ball from a ball handler, flies to the floor in transition, 3 seconds left in the third quarter. They have to foul him to stop a layup, right? Like just head, nose for the ball. I'm fighting for it kind of plays. Tough dude. And this reminded me when rewatching all three of his foul draw situations. When Rick Carlisle said last year, if I told Aaron Nesmith to run through a brick wall, he would run through a brick wall. That's not exactly how he said it, but basically that, right? And so that got me thinking, is Aaron Nesmith getting underrated in these discussions about the Pacers? Because if he can be this guy, I talked about him very highly after their first preseason game last year, and he had a good season. But if he can be a guy who can make all these hustle plays and be like they want his minutes in the game, 2 steals, 1 block, dishing out some nice passes, handling the ball. The shot did not fall. He was 1 for 6 from the field. But if he is a 36% shooter who plays defense like that and makes hustle plays like that forever, like that's a good player, especially one who's playing defense on the wing. He's probably overcast last year. Playing the 4 is not what he should be doing. And that's where I wanted to take this conversation. I want to know if I'm underrating, if I personally, other people might feel differently about Aaron Nesmith than me. I want to know if I personally am underrating Aaron Nesmith because he took these strides forward last year, playing a position that I would call slightly out of position for him. Not entirely. If he plays the 4, that's fine. That's a fine choice for the Pacers. He's tall enough, but he's 6'5". He's probably better defending threes and down, just given that size thing. And so that's something I asked him about on media day. Like, I'll probably write this story at some point before the season starts. But, I asked him, what did you work on this summer? Kind of first, what in general, what did you work on? But like, what is different for you about when you're not playing the 4 this year? Which is funny because I just talked about in the first segment, Carlisle bringing him up in the power forward discussion, which is true. He could play the 4 this year too. That would also make the Nwora, Jarace Walker front court harder to get out there because if he's playing the 4, that probably means McConnell and them harder playing. But either way, I assume less minutes at the 4 coming for Nesmith. He was not playing the 4 as much in the 9-man rotation we saw in the first half on Sunday. He didn't play the 4 hardly at all in those minutes. So I asked him what he worked on. He just kind of said, being better overall. But the specific things he mentioned were pace, okay, perimeter stuff, ball handling, yeah, perimeter stuff, making better reads, right? Stuff that is going to be important if you're playing the 3. And then he kind of went on to describe it when I asked about playing the 3 instead of the 4. This was the thing that made it click for me. He said, playing above the arc, more or less in the corners, setting screens, quote, like Buddy, unquote, right? He can be that. I don't think he'll be the shooter Buddy Hield is, certainly. Not even going to try to compare them in that way. But if he can be a small forward who's like setting early screens and diving around and flying around the perimeter and being a brute force screen dude, instead of just being a corner 3 shooter all the time, that's kind of a better role for him to me. Like, he's not just like some spot up shooter who occasionally gets the cut. Like, if he's flying around on the perimeter, not saying he should be a catch and shoot guy, not saying they should be running plays for Aaron Nesmith, but if he's just kind of like a chaotic force guy on the perimeter, I think that will make a lot of sense. And defending at a position that is more apt with his size also makes a lot of sense. So a lot of stuff points to him being kind of a nice piece for the Pacers. Like, doing the stuff he did last year, but in a role like I just described, where he's playing a little more with pace, handling the ball a tiny bit more, making reads that he thinks are better, and setting those screens, playing between the corners more instead of in the corners. That's good stuff. That's a good role for Aaron Nesmith. And if you're the Pacers, part of the underrated thinking for them would be, well, he's an important defensive piece, right? He wants to be a vocal leader defensively. He told us that. He thinks they can do the 1%. He described it as the 1% things. If they can do that stuff a little better throughout the whole season, he thinks it's like 5 more wins, right, for them defensively, doing that kind of stuff. So he wants to be a defensive leader. He's saying the right things. He's a good enough shooter right now. And he's young. And he's going to be a restricted free agent next year. And he's extension eligible. Like, every single sign of that points to like a somewhat useful long-term piece. If he can't shoot as well this year, that is definitely important because he's not like a handle, take it to the rim guy. His cuts, he's not like he's weird. He's athletic, but doesn't have like bursty jumps or anything, if that makes any sense. So figuring out exactly what that player can be is tricky. But if he's a guy who can just like make 2 heads-up plays a game and get 4 free throws out of it, like he did against the Grizzlies, that suddenly is very important to his efficiency. Last year, he took 2 free throws a game, and he drilled them 84% from the line. That's not a lot of free throws, but that's a good amount. That's good enough, especially if he's in a bench role this year, right? That's valuable. That's why his true shooting percentage was almost a career high last year, despite shooting much better from 3 as a rookie. Not much better, despite shooting somewhat better from 3 as a rookie than he did for the Pacers, because he could get to the line and could do stuff around the rim a little bit better. His shooting percentage at the rim last year was a career low, but the volume was way up. So there's a lot of signs that suggest to me that Nesmith is it. To me, I've said this on this show. If I were building the Pacers rotation, I would put Nesmith in, and I would make decisions to keep him in. Like, I'm not working him. He's not like squeaking in at the end for me. I am putting him in my rotation and saying, what do I have to do to make sure this is the case? I will do that. Because if he can have a little more ball handling, make those nosy plays all the time, like get an extra free throw out of it, or be a defensive leader, just one extra thing adding to his game from the kind of like lowest possible level 3-and-D base that he provided last year, that's a valuable player and one that I'm looking forward to watching this season as his role kind of expands, as he's going to be, it sounds like, more of a perimeter guy if he's playing the three more. Let's conclude today's show by looking at the Rockets, the Pacers' opponent tonight. Looking forward to seeing the Pacers against a different team, one that plays differently, one that does have a new coach. So the Rockets people will be learning a lot. Let's talk about Pacers, Rockets, what to watch for in that game. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Rockets with Jackson Gatlin. To hear the latest out of Houston, what's going on with the Ime Udoka-led Rockets as they host the Pacers for their first preseason game of the 2023-24 season. A new test for the Pacers. Of course, lots to watch for. We'll get to it all in this segment. I'm really looking forward to it. We'll break it all down tonight. The differences between the first game, the results, who stood out, who didn't, the rookies, everything. We'll get to it. So what about the Rockets specifically is going to be telling for this Pacers team? I want to start in the front court because I didn't expect this to be such an important thing for me to keep an eye on, and I think everybody should be keeping an eye on this, but Jaren Jackson just cooked the Pacers. I mean, he had Obi Toppin in jail. He just would walk his way into the post with Toppin guarding him, easy buckets. He got by Miles Turner twice, no problem, right? He did a great job. Steven Adams wasn't like, that was his first game since like January, I think. For Steven Adams, he only played 11 minutes, but he had 5 rebounds in 11 minutes and a block, and he made both of his shots. Like, even he was forceful around the rim. Pacers got bullied in the front court. No doubt about it. I don't even think they would say anything different than that. We didn't get to watch pressure because the game wasn't on Bally, so I don't know what they said after the game, but that's what I would imagine they're talking about. We can't get bullied in the front court again. Well, Alperen Şengün and Jabari Smith will be a test for them, and that's not because they're awesome players. Although Jabari Smith, I watched him in Summer League. That dude could be an awesome player, and Alperen Şengün is pretty dang good. But the au contraire, actually, it's their current. They're going to be good players. They're not awesome right this second. The fact that they're not awesome right this second is why it's an important test. Because if the Pacers can do really well against that group, that means, okay, maybe the Grizzlies were just an awful matchup for them, and they'll be a little better than that in the front court going forward. And if they get hosed tonight by the Rockets front court, well, then you're like, oh man, the Pacers' defensive scheme is not going to help them in the front court. If they can't guard one-on-one down there, it doesn't matter what they do on the perimeter. Teams can just walk it in and make plays from there. That's not going to fly. So we'll learn a lot by how the Pacers defend those guys, or if it even matters that much, right? If they play a team that has bigs like them, but Jabari Smith might play on the perimeter a ton, and Alperen Şengün could struggle like he has in the past to really get involved and get the ball. That's not necessarily his fault all the time, but that has been a thing for the Rockets, right? If that is the case, then maybe the Pacers aren't, maybe it's just a one-game overreaction to say that they got their butt kicked by Triple J and Adams. If they get their butt kicked again, then we'll have to have a longer conversation. And if it's somewhere in between, which is the most likely outcome, what actually happened, right? Did they defend the center well and not the power forward, or vice versa? What can they do better? That's something I'll be watching for, because Jaren Jackson Jr. made it look so freaking easy. It was ridiculous. 8 for 15, if you didn't watch Sunday's game, was Jaren Jackson. But he missed 4 threes. 8 for 12 inside the arc. 5 boards, 2 assists, 2 steals, 5 blocks, 18 points. I mean, he just was eating everybody up on the inside. That's one thing I'll be watching for. The other thing is that I think is going to be a little different. This is just a guess because we've never seen this Rockets team play, right? Fred VanVleet's going to be playing his first time for that team. Amen Thompson's going to be playing for the first time for that team. Jeff Green might be playing. I don't know what his preseason status is going to be. Dylan Brooks could be playing for the first time. They have a lot of new-ish players. Jock Landale, and new head coach. Like I said, who knows how they're going to play, but given what their personnel looks like, I think they're going to be a team that's really spread out, right? Really spread out, and tries to use their players' creation abilities to their advantage. Fred VanVleet can shoot. Jalen Green can really put it on the floor and take it to the cup. Amen Thompson can really put it on the floor and take it to the cup, although he might have at least immediately in his time in the NBA, some negative spacing concerns. Jabari Smith could be both a shooter and a guy who can occasionally take it to the cup. And Sengun is a beast around the rim, right? They could be a very well spaced out, balanced team with a decent bench group of guys who can also do a lot of that stuff. We'll see exactly how they decide to do their bench group. That group could be a little more smushed, but they'll be spacing it out more than the Grizzlies do, where Adams is certainly more, 15 feet and in, set screens, run to the basket kind of player. Jaren Jackson was doing that a ton in this first game. What do the Pacers play like when especially in their new scheme that's more one-on-one, two-on-two based? Whenever the floor is way wider, things are more spread out, and they have to defend more in space. What's that going to look like? It's a different talent level. It's different skill sets for those guys. Fred VanVleet's not as shifty side to side, right? Maybe they can hang better with him. We'll see. I don't know how many pick and rolls the Rockets plan on running, but we'll learn a little bit more about the Pacers defense against that kind of scheme as well. The little nuances between all these teams the Pacers play are going to be valuable to gain insights about their preseason performances, just like the Grizzlies being a possession team that was killing it inside was valuable to learn about the Pacers. We'll see how they respond to that tonight in Houston. I am really looking forward to it. In a non-Houston macro perspective for the Pacers, obviously, the same questions that we've been talking about all training camp are going to be the ones that we answer right after the game. Who started? Was it the expected group? Who is the backup center? How did the new guys look? How did the rookies look? How did Mathurin look evolving? What was the rotation? Was it anything unique? Of course, that stuff still matters. And of course, we'll be watching that and tracking it. But beyond that, some other stuff that I am also looking forward to, or have a note section for to type in answers next to for this game. Tyrese Halliburton. Does he play? Again, he's on the trip. We saw him at the game. He was down in time for shoot around in the Memphis game. But they have a little bit, they're being conscious about his workload after the USA basketball experience. It did end like 3.5, 4 weeks before the season, but you just never know. That's hardcore basketball. That's a different time zone. You get beat up. It's physical. Just be cautious, right? It's a preseason game. So it makes sense to me why he didn't play. We will see if he does or does not. It looked like from the pictures, from social media pictures, this is not me talking to anyone, that he practiced on Monday. So maybe he plays. If he does, we can learn more about how he looks with Ben, what the team looks like when he's in there, what the rotation looks like when he's involved. There's a lot to learn there. And to a similar vein, if he does play, and I don't know this, I haven't asked, but I would assume the same logic applies to a player who played for Germany in the World Cup. Daniel Theis was also in sweats on Sunday. Does he play? How does he look? Is he the backup five? That could change the answer that we got to that question on Sunday, right? Just anything with those two players, I think will be noteworthy because they didn't play in the first game. So that's more information about this Pacers team. The other stuff I'll be watching for, any rotation changes. Does Walker get in with the main group in the first half? Is he one of the 9? What else potentially shifts with the backup center, the backup 4, the backup 3, all sorts of stuff that could change. Just Ben Shepherd get a sniff of time with those groups. Not because I think it'll ever happen during the season, but just because he looked solid in those minutes. Sunday, in his second half minutes, could he get a little bit of burn with the first group? That kind of stuff I'll be watching for. And how the Pacers line up defensively, right? Who's going to guard Fred VanVleet? I would guess Bruce Brown. I don't know that. Who's going to guard Jalen Green? I would guess Ben Mathurin. I don't know that. So that will be kind of telling. And especially given the skill sets of the players I just mentioned. Like I said earlier, Fred VanVleet, not super shifty side to side. How will the Pacers decide how to do all that? And if Halliburton plays, who do they put him on? How does that all shake into the equation? Houston, a very interesting team for the Pacers to learn stuff from. And we'll be watching for all of that and talking about it tomorrow here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Later in this week, Thursday show, I'm just titling it Veteran Questions, right? We talk a lot about the young guys and the future of them, and we've inadvertent, and for different reasons, non-basketball reasons, talked a lot about Buddy Hield in the last month or so. But I want to talk about the vets in general, McConnell, Theis, and Hield, and answer a big question about them and their season. Friday, fun show. We'll see when I can reveal what it actually is. Looking forward to that one as well. And then next week, we've got more games to talk about. They play again next Monday night. They'll have had Fan Jam over the weekend, so lots of stuff to get to here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. You know we're bringing it all to you every single day via the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you all so much for listening. Hope you had a fantastic day. We will see you tomorrow.